Good morning, Chief Justice, Your Honors. May it please the Court. My name is Francesca Caminero from Northern Southeastern University, and
You're not supposed to tell us where you're from.
they asked me to tell you.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. All right then.
And I, along with my co-counsel, Zarina St. Lawrence, represent the appellant in this case. I will be speaking for 13 minutes, addressing all issues, and reserving 2 minutes for rebuttal. Your Honors, this is a case where the application of the death penalty is contrary to the culture, traditions, and values of the Puerto Rican people. We respectfully ask this court to reverse the ruling of the First Circuit Court of Appeals because to hold otherwise would be contrary to the culture, traditions, and values of the Puerto Rican people. Your Honor, the ruling of the First Circuit Court of Appeals should be denied for the following 2 reasons. First, the appellant does have standing to invoke the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, known as the ICCPR. Second, the Federal Death Penalty Act is locally inapplicable to Puerto Rico due to express prohibition of the death penalty in the Puerto Rican Constitution and due to the lack of representation the people experience in Congress.
Well, to address the intent of Congress in passing this Federal Death Penalty Act, did that explicitly exclude Puerto Rico?
Yes, because it did not address Puerto Rico in it. It was silent on that.
So it's implicit.
Yes.
Who decides whether it's locally inapplicable now?
The Congress does, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, would you like a brief
I'm sorry. Before you go further, again, following up on Justice Perry's question, Puerto Rico was not specifically excluded, was it, from the FDPA?
The Puerto Rico was excluded.
It was not included and it was not excluded.
Correct,
right?
Your Honor.
Now, were there any other entities that were excluded or not excluded?
That is, I'm not aware of that. Your Honor.
Where I'm going with that is, were the Native American tribes excluded from the application of the FDPA?
From my understanding, they were not.
They were not excluded.
They were not excluded.
Okay. If I were to tell you, and I'm not saying that I'm right,
Okay.
that they were excluded, specifically meaning that the FDPA would not apply to a crime committed in the Indian nation. If I were to tell you that, and that they were explicitly excluded, and Puerto Rico was not, if that were the case, what would that say with respect to the intent of Congress?
It would say, Your Honor, that the intent of Congress was to exclude the Indian tribe, but not Puerto Rico, because they wanted to apply to Puerto Rico then as a commonwealth, because the Indian tribe.
So the intent, you would say that if that's the case, and I'm not saying that if that were the case, then you would say that the intent of Congress in that instance would be to include Puerto Rico under the FDPA.
If it was silent on
Puerto Rico, but expressly excluding the Indian tribes.
Your
I don't
Honor.
want to say Indian tribes, the Native American tribes.
Your Honor, then the Puerto Rican people would take that as an understanding that Puerto Rico is excluded from it.
But you're arguing
Excluded?
If they did not include Puerto Rico specifically, if I'm understanding
No,
the
I
question
think you
correctly,
said they excluded the Native Americans.
but included Puerto Rico,
No, they were silent. They said nothing about Puerto Rico.
then from my understanding, Your Honor, it would be that it does not apply to Puerto Rico if it is silent on
Well,
Puerto Rico.
So it wouldn't matter what they said about the sovereign nations of the Native Americans.
Correct, Your Honor.
It wouldn't matter.
It would not matter, and
Well, under statutory construction, wouldn't it mean that they knew how to exclude and everybody else is included?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase your question, Your Honor?
Under statutory construction, if they excluded the Native Americans on one hand and did not say anything about anybody else, that everybody else is included?
If they exclude ICCPR, and the United States is obligated to interpret its laws in accordance with international law whenever possible, according to the Charming Betsy Doctrine, which says, an act of Congress ought never to be construed to violate the law of nations if any other possible construction remains. Therefore, Your Honors, by passing the Federal Death Penalty Act and trying to implement the death penalty onto the island, when the people of Puerto Rico have specifically expressed they don't want the death penalty, is in violation of the ICCPR, which the United States signed on to, with the intent to abide by it. The purpose of the ICCPR is to respect civil and political rights of individuals, including the right to life. Article 1 of the ICCPR states that, quote, all peoples have the right of self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Self-determination is an inherent right and a foundational principle of international law. The Constitution of the United States was created by our founding fathers to instill values and order in our country by permitting certain actions and placing limitations on other actions.
Now this ICCPR, weren't we the courts strictly prohibited from interpreting that?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand
Wasn't
the
that
question.
taken out of the purview of the courts?
Correct, Your Honor. But under the Vienna Convention, under Article 18, a state is obligated to refrain from acts which would defeat the object and the purpose of a treaty when it has signed the treaty. And the purpose of the ICCPR is to protect the civil and human rights of individuals. So the intent of the United States when they signed the ICCPR was to abide by it.
Well, did not the ICCPR state that a signatory to that, if they already had the death penalty, were not required to abolish it, to make sure that death is different, that it be held to high scrutiny?
Correct, Your Honor. But
Did Puerto Rico sign that?
they did. The ICCPR?
Yes. Okay.
But it goes back to the intent and the purpose of the treaty. Although the United States did hold reservations to it, they signed on to it. And also, when they ratified the Puerto Rican Constitution, they did not eliminate the Article 2, Section 7.
Now, was not that provision in the Puerto Rican Constitution peculiar to Puerto Rico only? They said it's okay for Puerto Rico not to have a death penalty?
Yes, Your Honor.
But did they also say that the United States could not have it?
It did not specifically state that about other states.
Well, doesn't the federal trump the local, what do you call them, territory, commonwealth, or state?
Yes, Your Honor. Federal law does trump state laws, but it goes back to the intent and the purpose of the treaty and the Constitution. The United States signed on to they ratified the Puerto Rican Constitution, and they had the ability to eliminate that article, and they decided...
Well, they didn't eliminate the article as it pertained to Puerto Rico, internally.
Correct, Your Honor.
Federal law is external to Puerto Rico, is it not?
Correct, but the crime that was committed in Puerto Rico.
Well, isn't Puerto Rico, for all intents and purposes, a part of the United States?
Well, it is not a state. It does not enjoy...
I said a part of the United
Yes,
States.
a commonwealth.
Although it's not a state.
Yes.
But it's a
yes.
part of the United States.
Correct, Your Honor.
And the citizens are citizens of the United States?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
But they do not enjoy all of the federal representation that everyone else in the other 50 states enjoy.
But they do enjoy the right to be killed by the United States.
Not necessarily, Your Honor. Only because the Puerto Rican people are extremely against the death penalty.
Well, most people who the death penalty is imposed against are against it.
Correct. But it would go under the cruel and unusual punishment if they are sentenced to death, and it does go forward because if they are sentenced to death, they would have to be sent from Puerto Rico, obviously because they cannot be killed in Puerto Rico, to the United States in a jail where they have no family that can come and visit them. They are in a different country, and they have to wait who knows how many years before they are actually killed. So that falls.
Isn't that the same argument you made for any state in the United States?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Can't the argument be made for any state in the United States that doesn't have a death penalty?
Not necessarily, Your Honor, because it is sometimes a little more difficult for people to come from a Caribbean island into the United States, not because of difficulties document-wise, but distance-wise.
So it's cruel and unusual because the family cannot come to see them before they die. Is that what you're telling me?
In certain terms, yes, Your Honor.
And that obviates the death sentence for residents and citizens of Puerto Rico.
Well, Your Honor, it goes back to the culture and historical.
Puerto Rico, representing the government of the United States of America. I would like to reserve 3 minutes for rebuttal.
Okay,
May you please report.
you may proceed.
This case is about that. The violent killing of an innocent person, providing aid to our justice system. This case is about the violation of our most sacred right, life. And the crimes for which the petitioner is being accused clearly state death as punishment under sections 921 of U.S.C. Code 18, which rule sections 924 for the killing of a person with a firearm in relation to a violent crime. The Federal Death Penalty Act is locally applicable to Puerto Rico. In reality, whether a law is locally inapplicable under Section 9 of the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act is a matter of congressional intent. Was Congress silent about the application of the death penalty in Puerto Rico? The answer is no. As we stated, also in the sections 1111 of the Federal Murder Rule, which governs the sections 1513 of killing a witness of state, also says it applies to Puerto Rico territories, maritime territories. With all due respect, Sister Counsel is misleading the court because Congress did exclude Indian tribes, American Indian tribes, on sections 3598 of the Death Penalty Act.
So the Native American tribes were specifically excluded.
Yes, Your Honor.
So what do you conclude from that vis-a-vis Puerto Rico?
The logical conclusion is that the act was legislated by Congress to apply to everyone in the United States, the 50 states, except the Indian tribes.
But isn't it, cannot the argument be made that Indian tribes and the United States, they're sovereign nations? Because the Native American tribes are considered sovereign nations. So that relationship may be considered with the relationship that Puerto Rico has with the United States, which is not on a sovereign nation basis, but rather on a compact. Would that make a difference to you?
Well,
That one would be excluded because they're sovereign nations, and one would not be stated because it's considered part of the United States, and therefore it will include Puerto Rico. Why cannot that argument be made?
I don't know if I'm saying correctly.
Very simple. The reason the argument could be made why the Native American tribes were excluded is because they're sovereign nations. Both Puerto Rico and the United States are not sovereign nations. Puerto Rico is under the tutelage of the United States. So therefore, they went out of their way to explicitly exclude the Native American tribes, but they felt that they did not need to go out of their way to explicitly exclude Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico is not a sovereign nation, but rather part of the United States federal system.
Well, the first part of the argument, I will agree to that. But the last part, since 1920s, the insular cases stated that Puerto Rico belongs to the United States. It's not part. We've been treated, Puerto Ricans are being treated differently from the rest of the United States and from the same compact that they both agreed on. So I will understand that the reason that it was the Indian tribes that were excluded is because, yes, they were a sovereign nation, and Puerto Ricans are not. And that will, I think that will follow our argument, and that there was an exclusion of the Indian tribes. Congress could exclude Puerto Rico, and there has been times that Congress also could have had the opportunity to exclude, for example, the Wiretap Act, that it was also applicable to Puerto Rico, even when it was included a prohibition of it in our Constitution.
Yeah, but you're going away from the argument that because the Native American tribes were excluded and Puerto Rico was not mentioned, it meant that Puerto Rico therefore would be included in the FDPA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Your Honor, we will have to revise that statute, but it goes away from our controversy right now. We would like to state that in the Fifth Amendment of the United States, it does mention capital punishment, and the due process clause is made so people can be deprived of life, liberty, and property, but with some measurements to improve the justice system and some safeguards.
No worries.
So you're saying that because Mr. Pujols is not claiming that in his trial there was no violation of his due process rights, therefore the imposition of the death penalty to him would not apply because he's not claiming that his trial was devoid of due process. The conviction itself was not in violation of his due process rights, therefore the sentence is permissible.
We do think that there was not.
That was a friendly question.
What?
That was a friendly.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it was.
What you should say is, I heartily agree with you, Judge.
Hurry up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that it?
You done?
No.
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
It's just beginning.
Was that? Oh, it's a rebuttal.
Well, I would like them to refer to some of the statements that were made by Sister also.
Okay.
Congress, there's been times when the Congress, besides the white that I was applying for, Congress has applied laws even when it hasn't expressed that it is included, Puerto Rico was included. There's been times when Congress has even applied federal law when even those laws don't apply to local states. That happened with the Buy American law in a case from 2012.
What happened there?
The clause of Buy American Act was applied to Puerto Rico in a case when it decided that even if it wasn't permitted even if it didn't apply to federal local states, it did apply to Puerto Rico.
Very well.
Since the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, like you were saying, does not have an extraterritorial clause, and Congress has not legislated to make itself executable, the petitioner does not have a standing to invoke the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, like Councilor was stated before. Sir, Your Honors, we just want to impose what is the rule of. We don't want Puerto Ricans to be treated different as the different the 50 states. We want to apply federal law and federal jurisdiction to United States citizens that belong to the United States.
Thank you very much.